Welcome, everyone, to this week's Ask the Expert webinar run by the Distilled Spirits Council. I would like to start off by letting everyone know that we will be recording this webinar so that it will be available on the events page of the Discus website, as well as our YouTube channel. So this webinar will be recorded as well as live. Welcome to our Ask the Expert webinar series. I am Ross Mulcairn, Director of Member Services and Business Development here at the Distilled Spirits Council of the U.S., that are known as DISCUS. Today's topic is Beyond Tequila, Innovations and Opportunities with Agave. And our guests today are Linda Doherty of Vinicola Consulting, and in a second we will have Mike Cameron of Devil's River Distillery joining us as well. For those of you who are not familiar with Discus, Discus is the leading voice and advocate for our members in the distilled spirits industry here in the US and around the world. We provide a wealth of resources and services, including this webinar series that aims to educate and share relevant trends, ideas, and resources and opportunities for distillers and members of the spirits industry overall. Recent webinars that we've had have covered the benefits of pursuing formal spirits education for people in the industry already or new to the industry, the impact of tariffs on the hospitality industry and spirits producers, and we have upcoming webinars on e-commerce platforms and benefits, navigating distributor relationships for craft distilleries, and more, including many things that we'll be covering tariffs. I know that is a top hot issue across the industry right now. So with our housekeeping taken care of, I want to welcome our primary speaker today, Erlinda, who's the president and CEO of Vinicola Consulting. Erlinda, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity here to talk about the innovations and opportunities of agave. I always like to say there's always innovations and opportunities in agave. So I appreciate the time today to talk about what's going on in that space.
Amazing. Okay, so I would like to go ahead and get started. We are going to speak with Erlinda and our other expert, Mike, for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A afterwards. There is a Q&A button on your bottom of your screen. You are welcome to ask questions at any time. We'll sort of work them in where we can, but we'll also save some time at the end for our specific Q&A portion. So I will go ahead and get started. Quickly, Erlinda, before we dive into the topic too much, can you please give us just sort of a big picture image of the agave landscape here in the US?
Absolutely. I mean, we know it's been a kind of a chaotic quarter for sure. I mean, we were kind of going into this year with a lot of headwinds, right? That's all we seem to be talking about these days are the headwinds that are coming on the wine and spirits industry. But for sure, thankfully it seems right now that the implementation on tariffs for at least for tequila, which were included in the USMCA or the free trade agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada, are exempt right now. So that's good news. Although, even though those are on pause and will be taken up when the agreement comes up again next year, a lot of that uncertainty, which, and that talk about that had caused chaos since mid-January through April, had already impacted supply chains, caused major disruptions in the market. Many brands canceled their expansion plans, product launches were delayed or just nixed. Marketing campaigns also paused. And of course, that also impacted consumer confidence as well, right? We're going into this saying, gosh, what's going on in the market? What's going on with tariffs? Can we afford to buy anything anymore? So just a lot of, chaotic time. But even before that was all happening with, the tariff sort of uncertainty, the agave spirits market was already experiencing challenges, inflationary pressures, rock bottom pricing for agaves, which had already been an issue for a few years, and I'll get a little bit more into that later. But also changes in consumer preferences, what I like to say, the spirited debate regarding additives, U.S. federal labeling, regulatory changes. So there were already these sorts of, again, tailwinds, as I say, kind of going into this that were affecting the agave market before spirits industry, before we had the chaotic, sort of up and down with the tariffs. But on the bright side of all of this, the agave spirits market, which, tequila and mezcal are really the vast majority, and tequila really being the vast majority, as a combined category. As you all reported in for 2024 in your annual report, still experienced sales totaling $6.4 billion, and sales were actually up 2.9%, and only vodka sold more. So while there was this overall trend of market slowdown and contraction and changes in decreasing in consumer consumption, agave continues to be the gift that seems to be, keeping on giving regardless of what's happening. So, that's the bright side of all of this. And like I said earlier, the topic of today's discussion, there always seems to be, some opportunities here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erlinda. And I appreciate the shout out to one of our other wonderful Discus benefits, our annual report, if those who have
Right.
not gone through and checked our annual numbers. And before we go any
I
further,
love
I just
that
wanted to,
report.
yeah, it's amazing. And I wanted to make sure we welcomed and introduced Mike Cameron, co-founder and president of Devil's River Distillery in San Antonio, Texas. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike.
Yes, thank you guys.
Absolutely. So next, I know, Erlinda, that was great. Thank you for giving us sort of the overall macro view of this landscape. In your experience so far, how are producers and suppliers sort of maneuvering through these times right now? What is the production, sales, new product development strategies that we're seeing as people sort of figure out what's next in this space?
Yes, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, there were already many factors at play affecting the market. One of them, as I said before, was the very low price for agave, about 4 to 8 pesos per kilo, which is basically like 17 to 14 cents a pound in Jalisco for the Blue Weber agave, which is the only agave that's allowed to be used to make tequila, and then only slightly less, or slightly less, I should say, per kilo in Oaxaca. So, I mean, we're talking, no incentive really for a lot of these growers to grow. And this has been the case now for about 2 years. And based on recent conversations that I've had with agave growers and producers in Mexico, we expect this to be the case for another 6 or so years. So the overproduction to meet the demands of COVID, reared its head, obviously, and these low prices for agave growers presented a major challenge with many growers kind of deciding to not grow. But it also presented some opportunities, interesting opportunities, and I would say more so in the tequila space, in at least 3 ways, and I'll go into that a little bit here. So some growers, and again, mostly the case in Jalisco, saw this as an opportunity, the low price, as we're talking about for agave here, to use the capital they had built up over the years to actually build their own distilleries on their own farms to bypass larger scale tequila distillers and sell their own finished liquid directly, whether as their own private brands or to larger brands needing finished liquid. So we see these growers becoming distillers. And what we expect to see in the market now, in terms of innovation, is that we'll be seeing more smaller independent brands of what I like to call estate grown and produced tequila come into the market that can be very well priced because, again, the price for the agaves were very low. So we can see, I expect to see some really, like let's say $20 a bottle for a really, really well-made tequila, really interesting tequila that are, will compete with some of the bigger brands. So this is sort of an interesting, I would say, take or a pivot that a lot of these, that not a lot, but a handful of growers were able to do because of capital they had stored up for many years of high growth in tequila. Now with some of the larger brands, the lower price of agave enabled a lot more cushion and flexibility with pricing. So even with the threat of tariffs, for at least the big brands, consumers weren't going to see that much increase in the price for their to absorb the tariffs. Maybe 10% maximum is kind of what I heard. Now, again, that's not, insignificant, but it's not as bad as it could have been. And so now, but with the threat of the tariff gone, again, this bigger, we have this ability of bigger brands to use this lower level of input for the agaves to increase their cushions for pricing. And even with the challenges of a shrinking market, we're going to see maybe some bigger brands, decreasing their prices, doing some discount pricing, especially at bigger retailers, to mitigate inflation, to maneuver through changes in consumer preferences and demand. We will also see some of the ability now for some of these bigger brands to relaunch their products that have been on hold. I expect to see a lot more Cristalino, which has been sort of an underdeveloped brand, I would say, in the United States. It's been very big in Mexico for some time, but now sort of really taking hold here in the United States. And a larger push for market expansion. So I think that even though the lower price of agave was a really big challenge and a concern for for the tequila industry, we've seen this pivot now to where this has enabled a cushion for big brands to kind of mitigate and meet the challenges of the smaller and shrinking market, but also for these smaller, like I was saying, grower tequilas kind of coming into the play, being able to offer really independent and interesting tequilas at a lower price. Now, regarding mezcal, mezcal again is near and dear to my heart, and really it only makes up a tiny piece, maybe 1% of the overall agave market in sales. Has been seeing phenomenal growth over the years. Of course, that has slowed, just like everything else has. But the producers and growers in Oaxaca and the other 8 states of the denomination of origin have a different experience of sort of riding out these challenges and how they're innovating. They, of course, don't have the history and the capital and the resources that Jalisco has. But what we're seeing, which is really, again, sort of happy, it makes me feel good, as a mezcal educator, is that we're seeing maturation in the market and more penetration on retail shelves. So not so much the growth on the on-premise, market, also because restaurants and bars are, also having their own sets of challenges, but it's becoming, less of this sort of bartender, mixologist-driven or agave geek product and moved more and more into the mainstream. More folks are understanding mezcal, understanding its beauty, its differences from tequila. And we're finding, especially now more of the quote bigger brands, really making a push to get the product into retail space. So again, while that kind of was a little bit that was diminishing with all the chaos again of the tariffs, we now see a kind of slow again push into really moving mezcal onto retail shelves for more mainstream purchasing. Now, I mentioned big brands. Well, of course, big brands in mezcal are still considered tiny, or mid-sized brands at the most compared to other agave or tequila brands. But what we see happening here in terms of innovation, I guess, or maybe trends, is the handful or so of, again, big brands are sort of jockeying to see who's going to be the bigger player. And because we're seeing a lot less of, acquisition and bigger suppliers purchasing smaller brands, we're now seeing more talk of how can some of these mid-sized brands or big brands actually consolidate and come together to combine the market. So it's interesting to see, and to view this sort of exploration of consolidation in the mezcal market, as opposed to just simply being purchased and much less M&A. That's not happening right now. But again, so that's kind of what we're seeing. And we're not seeing as many, big brands again, or sorry, I should say new brands coming into play, but more so, again, this sort of concentration really getting mezcal into more mainstream purchasing, which, again, makes me happy as someone who teaches mezcal, that more and more folks are really, getting interested in learning about it and wanting to purchase it in different areas. So that's tequila and mezcal. And then, of course, we have other agave spirits like Bacanora and Raicilla, which are actually agave as well and are still very tiny, but growing. And there are a couple of brands that have established themselves, in this niche for a while now and are still very minor players, but are still growing. And that's interesting to see. And then, of course, Sotol, which is its own thing and mainly produced in Chihuahua, but we always kind of lump Sotol with agave spirits, even though it's its own particular plant. But we see that also growing in actually more so domestically. We can have a discussion about that too, but more so domestically in the United States than in Mexico itself. And don't quote me on that, but I do feel like I've seen more growth of U.S. Sotol than I have in Sotol from Chihuahua.
Wow. Well, speaking of US-based producers who are doing interesting things with agave, I was hoping to get a little bit from Mike on Devil's River is a distillery, as we said, in San Antonio, and you are mostly making whiskeys these days, I believe, right, Mike?
Yes.
Now, I was hearing and I was looking through your site and I saw that you guys are now doing an agave bourbon. Now, when we think of agave spirits, I think most people think of tequila and mezcal and some of the smaller brands. And I would not normally think of, your again, tequila is a Mexican defined product and a bourbon, it has to be grown in the US. So you would normally assume those are two separate things, but you've put them together to do something pretty interesting. What are you working on right now, Mike? How did you guys come up with this idea for an agave bourbon?
Well, I guess first of all, thanks for inviting me to the call, and I'll agree with everything Erlinda has stated earlier. She's spot on with her assessment, at least in my experience from the regions of Jalisco and Oaxaca, as far as what's going on there and how it's the current state. So it's a very good summary that you did. Thank you for mentioning all that. But I'm in South Texas. I'm currently about 2 miles away from the Boca Chica launch site where Elon Musk has been launching his rockets. I actually happen to be very close to Mexico today. But Mexican culture is very much a part of Texas. The city that I live in is about 65% almost Hispanic. It's about being local with your brand and appealing to certain consumers. But I found that this particular product has not only interested a lot of people. There's 3,100 craft distilleries in North America, and we all have some different things that we're producing. But to be unique and different is obviously important. As long as it tastes good and people, migrate towards it, that's certainly important. But the concept came a couple of years ago, and I basically thought about what about combining these two. And I single-handedly was able to upset the bourbon community. I upset the tequila community and all the whiskey nerds in one product. So it wasn't my intent, but I had a lot of explaining to do because, and I get it, the purity and the respect of each one of those categories, how it's our native spirit. But I like the idea of combining cultures, and that's what America is about, in my opinion. So I thought, what if this could be something, basically a flavored whiskey, a flavored bourbon, and TTD approved my label, and so as long as I had their blessing, then I was able to move forward. But I've spent a lot of time down in both Jalisco and Oaxaca and learning about that, and I have nothing but respect for the bourbon industry or the tequila industry, to be clear, and the mezcal industry and all the other categories that Erlinda mentioned. So that's kind of where where it all started, and I knew it would be considered unique, and it's worked. It's now become our number one seller out of our entire portfolio. Our brands is currently sold in 38 states, and the Agave bourbon is our number one seller. So it's been a nice shot in the arm for our company. I can tell you, going down to Jalisco and meeting with the tequila regulatory, which I was down there a couple of years ago with Chris Swanger, and we got to visit, and also Oaxaca, to learn about the culture, the industry, the production process, everything. I've been there a total probably maybe six times each one of those regions, just because I find it so fascinating. They are very concerned about, as is the American bourbon industry, about their reputation, and they honestly, they don't care for agave wine, for instance. They just don't like it. And if there's people on this call that produce agave wine, my apologies, but that is my takeaway. And they didn't like me when I first showed up with my agave bourbon, but I was able to explain that this is coming from a place of respect for your culture, our culture, and how do we maybe mingle it together. So that we got along very well after they understood exactly what we were doing. And the same with the bourbon community, and it's just opened up a whole new category. So it's very important to me to do everything we do is be all natural, so we don't have anything artificial in anything we produce. And the agave industry is, I think, aligned with that. When you go to CRT and you see how strict their regulations are, you understand that they are very serious about their tequila. And I went into their conference room, which was the biggest conference room I've ever been in my life. It was a triangle-shaped room with about 100 passengers, it seemed like, for this meeting room, and it was full. And we had a great discussion. They put up some wonderful slides about the tequila industry. One thing I think where there's an opportunity for American distillers, or any distiller for that matter, is that if you look at where the majority of tequila is sold, no surprise, in the United States, quite a bit of the majority. So I'd say, I don't know if it's still the same, but I think back then it was like 80% of all tequila is sold in the U.S. That's a pretty large number. Well, the U.S. is only 5% of the world population. And so there's a whole big old world out there to create these wonderful new expressions. And with the current 0 for 0 tariff conversations going on and potential negotiations going on with all these other countries, I think it opens up a whole new opportunity to export. So, which may drive the cost of tequila up when there's a lower demand. But again, Erlinda was exactly spot on when she mentioned the supply issue. I'm friends with several of the largest agave producers in Mexico now, and they are concerned about the price, the pesos, per kilo issue. They were planning for success, so they planted and planted and planted. So there's farms everywhere, as anyone that's been down there has seen. But it's not just about an agave whiskey, or it's about a lot of things you can do with agave. A lot of people on the history of this may not realize that Mexico, many centuries ago, produced a pulque, which is just a Mexican beer essentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when the Spanish explorers came into that country, they taught Mexico producers that were making pulque how to distill. And that's kind of where that's the merging of cultures and sharing ideas, and that's where tequila started. And so there's a lot to be done there. I think there's a lot more products that can be considered, and that will be products that people will migrate towards. But agave, you think about it, it's an all natural product, agricultural product. It's got a great background and story, and so we've had nothing but a great experience with our expression of agave bourbon. So if that helps people understand a little bit how this got started and where we've ended up at this point.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. And
Can I ask Mike a question? Mike, do you mind if I ask you a question? I'm fascinated by your product. I think it's amazing. And, again, just seeing how we innovate here in the U.S., right, to incorporate different styles and flavors and trends. And I love the idea that your product is sort of a mashup between, Mexican and American cultures. So can you just tell me how do you, so it's a flavored whiskey with agave syrup, is that correct?
It's actually, some of it is proprietary, but I will tell you that we use the true 7-year-old agave, 100% Blue Weber agave. So that's the starting point. We do follow the typical processes where the agave is steamed and the juices are pressed, and we actually do a fermentation process on that, and that's what's imported into the United States, and then we do blending here. But that's in general kind of how we do it. But I think, as far as something that I find in our industry, I've been in the whiskey industry now for 20 years, in that you see these annual cyclical trends that, there's more whiskey consumed, the brown spirits months, typically September through February, the cooler months, holiday gatherings. I mean, whiskey is consumed a lot year round, but typically in those months more so than other months. So I was trying to think of a product that could still stay in the whiskey business that would make whiskey more relevant year round. And so that's also what this has done is that I'm not necessarily saying that women don't drink whiskey, because that's just not true. My wife drinks more whiskey than I do. But I am saying that in the past, it's kind of been considered an old man's drink, and it's changing, and it's been changing for a long time. And also with young people necessarily weren't big whiskey drinkers, and they're starting to migrate more towards high quality whiskey. So I wanted to have something that would be more relevant year round. So the spring and the summer months, this agave bourbon has been a great fill to make us, increase our sales during those periods where we could use a boost. And so it's actually, and if you have a tasting table, I was at an event last night with 500 people, industry people that came by our booth, and everyone migrated towards that agave bourbon. They sampled it, they loved it, and it was a lot of women, it was a lot of younger people that just say, I just don't drink whiskey. We'll try this. And they try it and they go, wow, this is something that I just didn't expect. So that's kind of really nice to see when you come up with something that, but then you get those hardcore whiskey drinkers, the bourbon purists, they don't care for it. And I get it. I'm more of a bourbon purist. I like, high proof bourbons, but it's, that's why I have 9 different expressions. I try to have something for everybody, and that's really the goal of our company.
Of course.
Well, you're talking to the DC, the DC chapter of the Women Who Whiskey Club. Here I'm the president of the chapter, so I know I'm all about whiskey in all forms. So I'm definitely going to have to try your whiskey here. But the other interesting thing that we were talking about here too is this notion of products that are produced in the United States that are either made from agave or agave adjacent, like Mike's product. Like I like to call those products agave adjacent. There is a small but growing, production capacity here in the U.S. for agave as well, especially in California and of course places like Texas that are more suited for hot, dry climates. It's an interesting time. I think we're seeing these trends too towards, and whether it's our political climate or whatever, post-COVID, kind of wanting to make sure that we have more control over supply chains and so forth. We do see this trend towards really trying to develop and having an interest in U.S. grown, U.S. made, U.S. agricultural products. Of course, bourbon being our number one, right, our native spirit here. But, I think that there is an opportunity to here for a development for U.S. agave products, and we're seeing it now. There are, like I said, California is doing a bunch, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, of course, growing agaves. And we won't really see the fruits of those, literally and figuratively, because it takes 5 to 7 years for agaves to mature. We won't see that really in the next few years or so to see how well those products do. But there definitely is, I think, potential for that as well in the United States. And, I kind of feel like you do, Mike, that, a rising tide kind of floats all boats, right? Like Mexico obviously has, created a brand for mezcal and tequila, and of course, a protected denomination of origin that we all respect and, I wouldn't say worship, I do in some ways, but anyways, but they have their own, their thing, right? But we can also have, American agave products and American agave adjacent products that are our own thing too, that we can be proud of and also support. So I think there's, again, always opportunity for agave, again, I'm biased, I guess, but I think there's always opportunity for agave spirits despite the uncertainty and chaos that we've been experiencing. And we've seen it, with the ability of growers and distillers, both abroad and here, to pivot and make, lemonade out of lemons, or, tequila out of agaves, however you want to put it.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the migration of agriculture over the centuries, it's not unusual. It's it's part of our history. When the American Indians introduced the growing of corn to pilgrims. I mean, it is something that is part of our life and culture, and I do see more agave farms popping up in the United States in the southern regions where it's that dry, climate that would be conducive for growing agave, and so I totally agree with you.
Amazing. So I will say, Mike, you mentioned this thing earlier about sort of the proud history of bourbon, and I know, as you mentioned, also the very large conference rooms with the tequila console. When you're going down to Mexico, what would you say to someone? Or Linda, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Mike. The point of this webinar is to talk about innovations and opportunities. We're all trying to find something new, trying to find a way to expand the business, expand the spirits industry. We're all trying to grow and do better. Is there something that you would say is sort of a best practice or idea for someone who wants to respect the very proud history and the culture and the nerds, of whom there are many on this call and we respect very deeply, both sort of in the agave spirits space or the bourbon space, or just the American whiskey space, for respecting that culture and that deep care, but also finding a way to innovate and either bring them on board or explain to them why we can do both. We can respect that tradition, be part of it, and also be something new and different.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just as I've gone through, and kind of matured in my palate and in age over the years, with trying different things. I mean, first of all, you have to have an open mind. I just think we all have to just realize there's just so many unique products out there. We just have to have an open mind to be open to trying new things. But But that's just me personally. But I also believe that transparency is a huge thing. And, regardless of if you're making your product in Mexico or if you're making it here in the United States, or, if you're using, mixing various things and blending certain things and so forth, I believe that transparency is really key. And knowing what is going in that product and how that product is made is important for me. So I think that as and especially younger consumers are very focused on that. They really want to know, what is going on in this bottle? Where is it coming from? Who's making it? What are the ingredients? I mean, for better or worse, they're very focused on that. So I think that, in terms of innovation and growing and just kind of meeting these new challenges, but again, also opportunities, we need to really be transparent as suppliers in letting folks know. And, it may not be your palate or not, whatever, but I think it's better to be open about what is going on, with your production and your product than it is to not. So I think that we really need to lean in on that idea of just being open about all these things that are involved, what's in the product, how is it made, and then and let's give the opportunity for folks to try them and to see if they like them or not. But that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah. And Mike, I know, we're talking about agave now, but, you are innovating on bourbon. Looking through the folks who we have listening in right now and people who are going to record later, we got a lot of distillers who are trying new things. What would you say is your best piece of advice for someone who wants to respect the tradition and the purists, but also sort of show that you can try new things and what the next innovations and steps are, whatever that may be, whatever spirit you're distilling?
Well, I mean, first I would say is don't be afraid to take chances. If you experiment and if you like it, don't just release it. Ask your friends, ask your neighbors, ask your employees. Go out and do market surveys. We don't have deep pockets, so what we do is we go to bars and restaurants and we do sampling of innovative products and see what kind of consumer response we get. I think that's a really good way and an efficient and an inexpensive way. And you start the conversation out with people and you say, look, I'm here to learn. I want you to be completely honest with me. And if you tell them that up front, it gives them that liberty, because people will look you in the eye and say, oh, this tastes great. And then they'll walk away and, make a face. So give them the liberty to say, hey, tell me what you really think. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm here to try to make a better product. And by doing that, you're going to have success. And we have a flavored bourbon portfolio, which includes the agave bourbon. We have a coffee bourbon and we have a cinnamon bourbon. And, I also wanted to be, listen to your audience, which younger consumers especially are interested in all natural. They're interested in sustainability. Those messages are more important than ever with especially younger people. And so that's the future generation of consumers out there. So be mindful of those things, and tell a story that is, on the cinnamon whiskey, for instance. We use agave in our cinnamon whiskey, but instead of using an artificial cinnamon, I use real cinnamon from Sri Lanka. So it's about 5 times more expensive than artificial cinnamon, but you can talk, to Erlinda's point earlier about, disclose what you're making. And to make an all natural product goes a long way. On our coffee bourbon, we're importing, real coffee beans from fair trade coffee producers. We work with a local coffee roaster here in San Antonio. Again, our agave is the sweetness element of that product. And it's a Vienna roast. And so it's on the darker end of a roast. It's got real caffeine in it, but this is a real all natural product, starting with the bourbon, which is your 3 basic ingredients: grain, yeast, and water. So it is important that you do, talk about those things. But I just say, in summary, don't be afraid to experiment and try different things. And agave is just one ingredient that can be, utilized in your production. There's a lot of great ingredients, but that's one that I've found to work for us.
Amazing. And as a reminder to our audience, we do have the Q&A open. So if you guys have any questions for our experts here, feel free to submit them as we go through. But yeah, so Erlinda, I know we've talked a little bit about both the history of the agave spirits and the protections that we have for the various regions, and we have, sort of the U.S. grown things. What would you say is probably, what do you anticipate as the next sort of big step in the industry? What is the, where are we going from here as we're innovating and we're finding opportunities? I know you said there's a lot of sort of small estate distillers who are doing something interesting there. Obviously, none of us know exactly what's coming down the pike, and with all the tariffs and various uncertainties. But where do you think the agave industry is going from here?
Like I said, earlier, I really think that we are becoming, more educated on what these products are, and I think that's a good thing. So that means that we're going to be expecting higher quality and, like I said, transparency, and the full story behind the products that we're enjoying. And because we are purchasing less but drinking higher quality and willing to pay a little bit more for a better quality product, that becomes even more important. I love to see that our market is becoming, like I said, more mature for mezcal products. Again, I'm a little biased there, but there is so much. There are 9 states in Mexico that can produce mezcal with all different agaves from all different terroirs. So it's interesting to me to see how that is becoming more mature, and we're learning more about individual agaves and different styles. So I think, we may not see, again, because of sort of the chaos of this year of, the uncertainty about the tariffs, but um, we'll start to see the average consumer will start to see now more products on retail shelves, which makes me very happy in terms of mezcal. And I do love the idea that we will start seeing tequilas at a beautiful price point, and of high quality. I think that that's really exciting too. That are more accessible and more approachable to younger consumers who, again, are maybe, shying away from that for whatever reason, but will make it, more easily accessible to new folks. So I think that all these changes just make agave products more accessible and really just serve to set them up to set the industry up even better than maybe it has been. And like I said, it's been able to ride all these waves, over these last several years, pre-COVID to now, for better or worse. So there's always opportunities there, but I'm excited to see how the maturation really of the agave spirit market here in the States, and again domestically too, with now that we understand Mexican tequila and Mexican mezcal, can we now understand or want to learn about, wow, what can American agaves be like? This could be amazing, so just interesting to me to see how we can compare all those things together and really just have more choice and more options too.
Absolutely. And then so Erlinda, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit,
Yeah,
and
that's
so
okay.
my apologies,
Yeah.
but we do have a question. For someone for a US-based agave spirit brand,
Mhm.
who's trying to import and produce authentic agave spirits from Mexico, is there anything that they can be doing to be aware of the tariff potential, the supply chain risks, to sort of protect themselves, to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in too much risk, as it relates to supply chain or tariff issues, minimizing costs, making sure that they're working to put together, as you said, high quality products at prices good for the market.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I guess, if you're getting into the market now with agave prices being so low, I mean, that's a major input, right, into your brand. So, you need to be able to use that to your advantage, at least for now, to factor in those prices and to factor in some cushioning for pricing. But I don't think, I mean, we're just going to have to hope and pray that when the USMCA is revisited again next year, there aren't any changes. But I mean, that's, you just, again, I think it's all a matter of how you're going to price your product and how you're going to market it, and leaving in, some area, some flexibility in your pricing to absorb, I mean, when the tariffs were threatened to be 25%, what I was hearing that at the most we were going to see maybe a 10% rise in prices on the shelves, right, for agave spirits. So I guess you could use that number as sort of like your guiding principle, the 10% here or there sort of cushion for how you want to price your product. But no one can read the tea leaves, right? I mean,
Of course.
so yeah.
And I will
But
I will
that's
take
just,
this
yeah.
chance to you know I'll say Discus membership is a wonderful opportunity for many people to be a part of and on the
Go
front
Discus.
lines of the advocacy for the distilled spirits industry here in the U.S. We are working with hundreds of brands here in the U.S., both distillers and our larger companies. So if you are interested in making sure that we are looking out for the distilled spirits industry here in the U.S., both importing agave, or if you're growing it here in the U.S., or your brand has nothing to do with agave, you're just really interested in the product and you're joining us today. For those of you who are members of Discus, thank you. For those who are considering Discus membership, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to have you on board. We are very proud to have two Discus members here talking with us today. And hopefully they have enjoyed everything that they've gotten as part of their membership and enjoyed being part of the Discus family.
Absolutely.
Okay, now, so that is all we have so far today. Linda, Mike, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we sign off for today?
Well, Ross, I'd just like to, reiterate what you just said regarding the memberships opportunity. When we started the Texas Distilled Spirits Association, we had about 5 or 6 members many years ago, and as we've grown, we've certainly been able to make headway on legislative issues in our state and assisting in federal issues. It's about having a large army of advocates for your industry, and it's a pretty you probably won't like me saying this, but there's 3,100 craft distillers and about 240 of them are Discus members. I think that's appalling. I think that we should have a lot more craft members that can see the value in joining Discus, because you are an advocate group for our industry. And so everything that you stand for, whether it's the Toast Not Tariffs initiative or lowering taxes, things that you've helped us over the years with, the more people that can get involved, it's good use of your money to join. And I was here was this organization many years ago that created this concept of Spirits United, which was to kind of invite the craft industry into their circle. I was reluctant at first. I'll be honest. This was Discus, who represented all the major liquor conglomerates around the world, but through learning about the people and their mission and how we can work together, I think it's the best decision I could have made to be part of it. We were one of the early adopters of joining Spirits United, and I can't say enough about how they have been an advocate for our industry. And there's power in numbers, and we've got a lot of voices out there that aren't being heard. And Discus is a sounding board for those ideas and those legislative changes. And we need everybody's help on these issues because it is important.
Amazing. Thank you, Mike. And Erlin, I'll go to you, but I didn't even ask him to say that. So I would like to thank Mike and for everyone. And in addition to Discus membership, if you are not signed up for our Spirits United platform, that is our grassroots advocacy platform. Anyone who has an interest in the spirits industry, you should just be a member of Spirits United so that we can all use our voices to rise up the industry and make sure that we're all looking out for each other. Erlinda, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Mike said. I'm a lobbyist by trade, actually. So Discus, and becoming a member was a no-brainer. But especially through all this tariff chaos and all these, trade issues, Discus has been, pivotal in helping to get the voice of the distilled spirits industry out to our elected officials. And this issue is not going away, unfortunately. So, but in terms of education and all the stuff that you guys do, the professional development and all that you provide members is very key. But and you didn't pay me to say that either. But no, I mean, I think and these webinars that you put out for everybody, I think are great, and the opportunity to network with other also I think other brands is also very key to learning from your peers and sharing your challenges and experiences and opportunities are also something that you offer that you wouldn't normally have. So anyway, those are I just want to also just thank you for having me on here again today. And Mike, I really enjoyed learning about your product. And actually, I'm normally based in DC, but I'm actually in San Antonio today. So maybe I need to go knock on your door and go visit. I'm going to go visit your distillery too. So it was a pleasure meeting you and hearing.
Yeah, I won't be there tonight, but come by the distillery downtown, and I will make sure they give you a cocktail on us. And we have live
Oh,
music on the patio with cigars. So
great. Great.
There you go. Sounds like a wonderful time. I'm sorry I will have to miss it myself. But thank you everybody for being here. As a reminder, we are doing these Ask the Expert webinars. Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern is going to be the consistent time moving forward. We have one next week on resilience and revenue, why e-commerce remains a growth engine for beverage alcohol brands amid industry headwinds. And you can look forward to other webinars on following Thursdays, whether that's on distributor relationships or shipping compliance or any sort of issues that are coming up soon. A recording of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who registered early next week, and this will be saved on our member portal for our members and on our YouTube channel. So thank you, Erlinda. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week and for all future webinars.